Hi everyone, this is Alan McKay and welcome to video 10. This is the last video in our 10-part training series, and from there, as I mentioned before, there are some bonus lessons that continue to go further down the rabbit hole for everyone exclusively in the live action series. But what I want to do is take everything that we've learned so far and bring it all together. So all of the dynamic simulations, our fluid simulations, the fire, the smoke, the dust, the concrete, the glass, the railings, the window frames, every little thing that we've done, I want to take and extract from our caches, set all up, set up everything to respect the materials, the projection mapping, set up the lighting, everything that we need to be able to then take it into the next stage, which is either setting up the shaders and all of that, if you want to go down that journey yourself, or continuing down the rabbit hole as part of the live action series. Now, we've done a lot in just 2 weeks, which is really 10 to 14 days. It's not very long at all. I've mentioned this before, but imagine what we could do with an entire year. Obviously, as of right now, we have the coronavirus, which is such a concern for people's health as well as our future in terms of what we're doing. It's been really interesting the last couple of days. I've been talking with Industrial Light and Magic, Framestore, Digital Domain, Pixar, Fuse Effects, and many other big visual effects studios in Hollywood and in the UK about what they're doing right now. Everyone's switching to remote work. Everyone's working from home. Framestore this week moved 1,200 of their employees to now working remotely from home. So I've mentioned this before, but I think that for a lot of us, whether it is that we have time now to be able to look at the future, or whether it is something where we need to act now and be able to land jobs and get work in an industry that is shifting, I think with the live action series, this is a chance for us to plant that seed now, so once the storm clears, it's time to harvest. In other words, this is our chance to be able to focus on ourselves and focus on growth, to really take our career, our skills, our knowledge, our ability, and of course our career options to the next level, to set ourselves up now so that way we're ready to hit the ground running once things start to settle down in the next couple of weeks or the next couple of months. Who knows where we're currently at? All I know is that this is your chance. When a lot of us say that we don't have time, this is our chance to be surrounding ourselves with other like-minded people, as well as information, mentors, as well as people who can help us build a strategy individually for ourselves and our needs and our goals, as well as to set those goals to be able to invest back in ourselves now. And like I said, for all of us who want to learn, who want to go out and get work right away, I want to equip you with those skills to be able to do exactly that. So in other words, I want to hold a career intensive to set our goals, do demo reel reviews immediately as well to review your work, and I want to hold a live workshop where we can go through how to work from home, how to set ourselves up for remote access, freelance, how to get clients, to do all of those things. So there's going to be a lot. We've got less than 24 hours until all of this is over. So this is your final chance if you want to join me for 12 months, as well as all of us in the live action series. There's still a few spots available, but it has come down to the wire. So this is up to you to make a decision. Like I said, I don't want to do a giant pitch, but I know a lot of us are on the fence and we're always kicking ourselves a week from now. Or we think, yeah, right, like registration is not seriously going to close, but it is. And a lot of us find out the hard way that we have to wait an entire year to get the chance to sign up again. So you've been warned. Tomorrow night, or I should say Friday, 11:59 p.m., registration closes entirely for another year. This has been fun serving you and getting to go through this training with you. I appreciate you, and I hope that you got a lot from this. I put my heart and soul into sharing as much as I can in the little bit of time that we've had, and I hope that this has been enough to help you gain a lot of knowledge and insights as you move forward. Okay, so enough rambling, let's dive in. Okay, we're here at the last lesson of the 10-part training series. We're also going to continue this with a few additional lessons outside of that for everyone who's in the live action series or watching this as a separate course. So in terms of what we're going to cover here, we're going to get into lighting, shading, and touching on a lot of that stuff. Now again, I just mentioned live action series. We spent a lot of time on this, because I can't really teach all of this in one lesson, doing the lighting, rendering, talking about the process, compositing, rendering elements, everything else, but we'll definitely get into a lot. So just to turn off the renderable and our effects for a moment, I just want to talk about our original building structure. Now, one thing that we did at the very beginning, but I'm going to do it again now, just to talk about this, is that we set up an additional projection camera that we use for projections. So I'm going to do that again just in case that part was skipped. So all of these we can see are instanced. They're all bold, meaning that we apply something to one, it's going to do it to all of them, as we can see. So we set up our selection set specifically for what's visible from the camera's perspective here. So there's going to be 3 shaders that we use. Material 1 is the default shader, material 2 is the projection, material 3 will be any areas that crack, like the insides of them. So initially, if we just go into the material editor here, I'm going to create a new V-Ray material. So V-Ray material, and we'll call this projection, and we just want to click on diffuse, and I'm just going to go into bitmap, and then we just want to get our image sequence here, and rather than choosing the whole image sequence, remember frame 147 of our projection is what we want to use. So I'm going to go to 147 and just click that one frame. So make sure the sequence is turned off. We just want to click 147. That brings in that one frame. Now, I want to keep this as a texture map. I'm just going to assign it. In fact, we can do it to all of the precast. Let's just assign it. And right now we haven't got mapping coordinates set up. So there's 2 things we want to do. One is the material right now is being assigned to everything. So let's go back up. I'm going to create a new shader. So click in the middle here, get material, multi-sub-object, and that allows me to have multiple shaders. I'm going to set number, click on set number here, set that to 3. And right now we just want to use material 2. So I'm just going to drag our projection shader into the empty slot, make sure it's an instance, so that way they're connected. It means if we change one, it changes the other, so that way I can go back to here and dial in the settings, and this will update. Okay, now I can just assign that to everything. So this shader here, we'll just call this the precast shader. This is for all the concrete, basically. So having that assigned, right now we just have the second shader set up, which is all we need to worry about. And if we were to render this, we're not really going to get to see much. I'm going to go into my rendering real quick. I think when I handed over the scene file, it had some settings already set up. You can either start from scratch or whatever you want. I had this optimized for rendering atmospherics. So I'm just going to set max subdivs to the default of 4. And the main thing is to set this to single. And again, like, we can blast away all of our settings. So in fact, let's just go in here into render elements if you like. And you can just delete all of those because we can set them all up again. So main thing is I just want to make sure I'm not saving anything to disk and I'm rendering one single frame. But if we render this right now, it has the shader set up, but the mapping is not set up. So it just looks gray and boring. So we need to go and add a camera map modifier and then pick our projection cam 147 because that one is the static camera that we set up at the very beginning. So by doing that now, the actual footage, or that one frame, 147, is now projected on here. So if I were to swap to the camera view, this probably makes a bit more sense. And then finally, if I went back into my material editor, I can go down here and say get, and we do V-Ray. In fact, let's just do bitmap. And this time, I'm going to choose the sequence. So let's just select one of these, click sequence, okay, and then double click. It's going to pop up saying, do you wish to do this? Fun fact, that's one thing that's weird about Max is it generates these IFL files. IFL was basically a sequence list. It's a text file. I won't bother. yeah, I won't bother opening it up. But basically, it's a text file of everything, and this is how you would work in DOS days. So it's kind of funny that it still uses that, but that's what that IFL file being generated is. So anyway, we just want to bring this in. The main difference is we want to set this to environment screen. If you don't do this, you're going to be like, why is this not working? So again, environment screen. And we want to go to rendering, environment, and just drag this texture map into the environment slot as an instance. Okay, so now we have a background set up. In Maya, this would be in your camera attributes image plane, but now we can see that that's working. Obviously, the top, we haven't set that up yet, but we can see the footage is being projected onto the geometry. So even the tree, everything is. So that works pretty well for what we're doing. Now, once we've done that, we can bring in the roof. And the roof would be the same deal. We already have the mapping set up by the looks of it. But, you know, let's just assign our shader. Hopefully we set up the material IDs the same. We did. So that should just work. Cool. And then same deal with this guy. We'll just put a camera map modifier on. So like I said, we did this in the very beginning, but I just want to kind of cover it again really quick. So I'm going to assign that. Okay, so in this case, let's just set up the mapping. So I'm going to edit poly. I'm just going to select these two polys and then do a material and then set that to 2. So that way it's using the right material ID. Okay, and we could definitely fiddle around with this, but I just want to go through the preliminary stuff that we need to worry about. Now, obviously the lighting is a bit intense, and again, we haven't really touched on lighting, but I had lights in our scene. So with our V-Ray light, we have, or we should have this light set up. If not, I'm going to talk about how to construct it. So I'm just going to my V-Ray light. This is the dome one that we have here. Okay, so in other words, we're just choosing dome, 2.5 multiplier. We could probably bring that down a little bit to 2. And all I'm doing initially is I'm creating a V-Ray HDRI. So if we go get material, V-Ray HDRI, we can bring that in. Then we just choose what we want to bring in. And we should have your Shores Building HDRI or whatever EXR or HDR that you have. And by adding this in, we now have the HDRI image here that we can then use to illuminate our shot. Okay, and then we can play with the horizontal to line that up if we need to. So let's just render out a frame of this. The other thing is we have the second light here, which we can probably bring down a little bit to 2. So I think that matches a lot better already. And we can definitely play with that more as we go. If you want to see the, if I just go back to the rendering environment, if you ever wanted to see this, you can just drop it in here. And it kind of gives you a good kind of starting point. So we know that the sun should be behind. Again, there's plenty of ways to work with this stuff, but I just want to kind of give the general idea. So we can see we got some nicer rim kind of lighting happening already just from having that brighter area. Okay, so bringing the plate back in there. That's what we're looking at. So this is just a good starting point. Like I said, we've already covered the projection part, but I want to go through this again. Same deal with these guys. We would just do a camera map and then pick our camera. These we would create a different texture. So I'm going to drag this down here and we'll call this frame. I don't know, let's just call it metal shader. And then with this projection, I'm going to drag it in Actually, yeah, we'll just drag it in as an instance as it already is. But the rest of this, though, we'll set with different shaders altogether. And so the same thing, I feel like with the glass, usually I wouldn't project a plate onto the glass, I would use reflections, but in this case, it doesn't bother me as much. So I'm going to say glass shader, oops. And again, just drag that in there. We may need to make this unique if we want to add reflections and stuff to it, but I feel like once it's moving, we can be doing something different with it. So just for now, going back to our metal shader, we'll get the mullions, assign, and then we can get the glass and assign the glass shader to that. And then finally we have the floors, which we'll deal with momentarily. But this is just giving us something to work with. And so if we go to glass, we can, these are, by the way, these are individual, so they're not all the same, so we're gonna have to do this a couple of times, but we would just set up group 1, which is, let's turn these all off for a moment just so we can see the individual groups. So we got, actually it is a whole set, so that kind of works. We go edit poly, or poly select, you can say ignore back facing, which will just help make sure we select the front. And I'm just going to choose select rather than have them move, just in case I ever bump my cursor or something. But the whole point is we just want to select all the front faces because we want to tell these to be a projection plate, if that's what you want to do. If you wanted these to be just 100% a glass shader with an environment reflection, you could do that as well. So the important thing is, as we're doing this, just to make sure that we're doing what's visible to camera, which is pretty much everything. But it mightn't be all the way down. Yeah, so some of these go outside of there, but I don't think it's too big a deal. Okay, so we're going to do material 2, so that way it switches to the second shader. So hopefully this makes sense. We got 3 shaders. I just changed this to 2, so this selection is now going to 2, whereas the first one is on the first shader, which we haven't set up. So that's how we're able to control that. Finally, we do a camera map, and then choose that camera again. And now when we render this, we're still going to do the metal bars and everything, but sorry, the railings, but you know, everything else is looking really good. Finally, we do have the railings, and I don't think we need to worry about projecting these as much as just doing a metal thing, which I think what we'll do is we'll set up a metal frame here, and this is what we'll actually assign to everything. So I think we can, well, first of all, let's just set up a metal shader. So I'm going to click here on the metal shader. I'm going to say V-Ray material. And we'll just make this more of a darker color. We can play with reflection and everything else momentarily, but I'm just going to give it some kind of value. I'm putting like around 100, just something on there. And I'm just going to drag this. Yeah, I was going to see if I could do that. Dope. Okay, so temporarily, I'm just going to get this material and drag it into an empty slot, and that way I can just assign it to the selection. The cool thing is this is being assigned both to the railings as well as the window frames. So now we can see that's all working. Obviously the reflection's a bit crazy. Definitely bring that down. So all of this is working. The diffuse color, we could definitely drop this to make it more of like a dark metal, like 10. The reflection, we can make 15. We'll play with this stuff soon. I don't want to get into the shader too much yet, so we'll just go back up, but I just want to point that out. So the glass, everything else is being projected, everything's good. We definitely need to play with this more, but already we're in a good spot. So this is kind of what we got into. We didn't get into the shaders, but obviously having everything have projections except for the rails, I think is really important. Even with the rails, like if we want to do this, we can put a camera map on this and assign the original shader. I just want to point this out. So like, because either way is fine. They're so small that I don't think it's really that big a deal. So if we wanted to do something like that, we have the camera map binding and we put the 147 camera, and then we're just going to get like free shader from, you know, free texture from doing that. So we've got options there if we want them. So interestingly, it doesn't look like all of the railings are instanced. So we might need to do this individually. So again, if you want to do that, you would just need to do it manually or write a script. And, you know, in the past, like doing stuff like this, I would just write a script. It would take 20, 30 seconds to do. And then you can just apply it to everything. So there's options in there. Okay, but that's the general idea. We've got, you know, basic lighting. We've got lighting that's more of a key light, more specific to doing the for doing the atmospherics. But the key thing from here, if you're just applying all this, unfortunately we do need to cache it out again. But the good thing is with the way we've set this up, it's literally just load up Tyflow, hit a button, it all exports, and all of the mapping coordinates are updated. So like I said, you know, whether it's before or after, usually in production what you would have is this would all be set up for you, or you would be doing this ahead of time to make sure that the mapping, everything's good to go as an asset when you jump on it. But again, it's good at this point just to understand, like, okay, so now that I've got my simulation all working, everything's good, we've, you know, done everything, I just need to go into the lighting and rendering. Part of that is setting up projections. So in that case, we would just export this as a pass again. And so just going back into Tyflow, the cool thing is that all of this stuff is set up where we don't have to do anything. We literally just export all of our stuff out and we're good to go. So at this point, I can just enable the export and enable prefrag, or we can do that a bit later. You know, as long as all of these are on, it'll all just export. So we just go in here, which is the beauty of how we set everything up. And I can just set this to be, I think it's geocache 2, but we'll call it geocache 4. And then we'll have glass 2. So they're set up. And you can just turn these guys on and export it all out. And then obviously this stuff here is just for collision, stuff like that, which we don't have to worry about. Okay, so I'm just going to hit export on each of these. It's probably like 15 minutes each. But that's the beauty. We've done this in a way where it wasn't like, oh my god, I gotta go back to the beginning and do all this stuff. It's literally just, you know, everything updates. Because we went through all of this stuff and we did it all in an intelligent way that builds up our process where now we just hit bake. Okay, and I just went and clicked on the glass here and exported that as well. So both of these have officially exported. It took, I don't know, 20 minutes, something like that. So again, it's extremely fast. Usually I'm used to waiting days or at least, you know, 10 hours. It really depends. Sometimes I've had sims that I've had to wait an entire week when they're really intense. So again, this is extremely fast. So now that those are done, just looking in here, we got TFC, blah, blah, blah. So I'm not sure if it created a new loader or not, but I'm just going to turn off our building, and with the renderable, I'm going to select the building and just make sure we're using the latest cache. And same thing with the secondaries as well. I think these automatically are being updated, but again, I'm just want to double check. Okay, so we got glass, and then we have the building here as well. Now, there's a few different ways. Like, if we wanted to, we could have actually set up like material IDs for every single type, so that way we have just one mesh and it can read in all these different shaders. Problem with that is that then you're going into like three, typically like projection, texture, and inner stuff, like cracked areas. They would all need to be 3 shaders each, and then you're doing it multiplied by all of these different assets. So I think it's just better the way that we've done it, which is that we've got all these individual groups, because now in the cache itself, we can access all of these through the export groups. So that allows us to set everything up individually. So we'll get into that soon. For now, I'm just going to assign the shader to both, and then we can split it up even more in a moment. So just for a second, I'm just going to assign we'll just assign this one the metal shader, which is going to be a bit weird, but anyway, so just so we have something assigned to it, and then we can just take a look at a rendered frame, check it's all good, and then we can start to split this all up and get the final setup going. I'm more interested in targeting the things like this is about to get even heavier than it currently is, so that's why I think it's important to kind of tackle things step by step. So before we break this up into all the individual elements, I want to probably just tweak the atmosphere first. So here we can see we got all the breaking geometry, that's all cached out. It's all looking really cool. I'm just going to render out a single frame of this so we can check this out. So a couple things I will do is we got the ship trails, so let's enable that. We obviously have the explosion, and then we have the dust. Okay, so we got those 3 there, and I'm just going to render out a single frame. We got a lot going on here, so render times might start to kind of step up a little bit. But we're going to be rendering the explosion, the dust fall, the trails, like the ship trail, as well as obviously all the geometry breaking apart, the glass, the railings, the ceiling, the window frames, the floors, the walls, everything. So there's a lot. We're starting to get pretty heavy into this. The cool thing is automatically, you can't really see it yet, but you can see the fire is actually a light source, so it's illuminating the environment. And we can definitely play with that and make things illuminate more if we want to, or whatever we want to do. Like I said, there's only so much we can cover in one lesson when it comes to doing like photoreal lighting, shading, everything else. So I just want to get the preliminary stuff in here rather than going all out. And at least that way you can kind of hint to where to continue on from here. Otherwise, this would be probably a 15 to 18 lesson video, which obviously it's already pretty huge. But here we can see the GI is affecting everything. We need to play with the samples if we wanted to, or just render this as a separate element, and that way we can do a bit of post-processing to the global illumination. But so far, that's looking pretty good. Like I said, it's going to be a steep render, so that's why we're not going to render out the whole thing yet. But we can just focus on, I just want to iron out all the shaders and get everything set up, so that way we're at a good point where you can continue on from there. So overall, I think this is looking pretty cool. I'm going to get all of our render, I was hoping I can use wildcards, there we go, I can. Cool, so star_render. Get these 3. I'm just going to drag them out of there for a second. Okay, so I just want to drop all of these into our render group. Sorry, renderable up here. Okay. So it just means that we can focus specifically on, we got our ship, but then we got all of our stuff here. And that way, sorry, this should be PFD, not PDF. Yeah, at least this way we've got everything all in the same place, but I'm going to just focus on each element and just tweak the shading a little bit. I think overall we've already got it looking pretty good, so I don't think there's too much we really need to do. But I'm just going to wait for the jump ahead a little bit. So I'm going to render out a single frame of this. We can just take a look and get a vibe for anything we need to tweak in the shader. I don't mind it being really bright in the beginning, because I expect it to blow out a fair bit in terms of color and things like that. So overall, like, this is just rendering still, but you know, you get the idea. Obviously with the geometry here, it's going to look really cool, but there's definitely things that I would tweak, but it would be more to do with just breaking up the shape. By adding a bit more turbulence, things like that, it would definitely help kind of just add a little micro detail, which I think would really help. But I think that's looking pretty cool. I wouldn't mind playing with the smoke colors, so let's just go down to rendering, volumetric options. Then we have smoke color. So I'm just going to say anything that's smoke, like not dust, but smoke, let's just bring it to like 20. And smoke opacity, I'm going to bring up to 0.8, and that'll make it a bit more dense overall. We can tell it to scatter a little bit more. I think that actually should be fine. Shadow strength, I think, you know, just these two things. Scattering means that the fire is going to illuminate, and well, even the smoke, it'll just illuminate a lot more. It'll scatter the light a lot more internally. And then the shadow strength is just going to kind of add contrast to the shadow, which I think will help. I don't really want to get too crazy into that. With the fire itself, I don't mind keeping this like at the default value. I think that it's working overall because we're using temperature for this. You know, we could go crazy with this, but I don't think it's really too necessary. So in other words, like taking the brights and bringing them back down, you can see you're going to get a bit more color range, stuff like that, that we could punch back up later in comp if we wanted to, but I don't mind this being blown out, like I mentioned. So the intensity overall, I think, kind of works for what we had. Yeah, I think even something like this, just, again, starting out weaker, and then as it gets into the core of it, it's a lot more hot. But yeah, I think overall the explosion we have is good. I can turn the building on just as reference, so that way we got something encapsulating the explosion side of it, and you can see that as a comparison. So just as some context here, this is with the explosion inside of the building. Obviously, you know, it's still rendering, it's still generating the cache, let alone rendering, but you can kind of get the idea that you can see that it's inside of it all and how it kind of works together. But now we can introduce the dust as the next element. You know, we've already kind of looked at the dust, and I don't think we really need to change too much about it, but that could be what we'll tackle next. So again, I feel like this overall is good. There's definitely a bit more breakup I would have to it overall, but I think it's pretty cool. Let's look at the dust fall elements. I'm just turning that on. And like I said, I think that this is in a pretty good place. We could, you know, dirty it up a little bit. So volumetric options, color, and there are things that we could introduce, like more randomized colors based on a texture, things like that, when we were simulating it. But again, there's so much to do in such a short amount of time, like 10 lessons is that, again, that's why the live action series, we're spending so much time, because we're getting really heavy into every single aspect. And there's so many elements here that are missing, by the way. Like, I would have pieces on fire, raining down, I would have sparks, I would have just so much other stuff, burn marks on the buildings. Like, there's so many things that I would be introducing, but we're just literally scratching the surface of what we can cover. So in this case, I'm just going to make it more of a dirty color. Make that about 30. And again, I would probably vary the colors a little bit more, ideally, but I think this will be good. So that's pretty much all I'll do there to that. I'll advance a few more frames just so we can kind of see it all falling down. And again, this is just building the light cache, but once we have the fire and explosions in there, you're going to see that illuminate all of this, so it's going to really affect it. It's going to be pretty cool. But I think overall that works pretty well for what we're doing. I might just desaturate the color a little bit. I think it's a little bit too saturated, too brown overall, but that's pretty much it. And we kind of touched on the fire trails already, but I'll get onto that, so I'm just going to bring the saturation back. Okay. So, again, just kind of going through this pretty quick. Again, it's still generating the light cache, but this is what the trails currently look like. It's more of a lighter color, and I think that that would be good to give just a bit more variation, because we have the dark brown dust, and then we have the explosion, which is black. So having this more of a lighter color, I think it'll help emphasize, like, having it more transparent will help emphasize the scale of this, because the density. But on top of that, just having it as more of a lighter color overall, I think just will help work to break everything up. So obviously it's a bit denser and it's on fire in the beginning, but there I feel like that's looking pretty good. Again, I think more resolution would be nice, but let's just see what we get. So this is the light cache, so I don't think it's going to be that illuminated. Alright, okay, seems like it is actually. So I guess this is a pretty intense light source in terms of how it affects everything, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, because it, if anything, it's more anticipating and showing integration between the two elements, but we can always play with that if we want to tone it back a little bit. Both, if you go right click, view array properties, you could set the generate GI down a little bit. What am I doing? Volumetric options. So there's also in here, we could just bring the overall multiplier down a little bit too. It's still affecting it a fair bit. So yeah, we could definitely toy around with that a bit, just to kind of, I guess it is really intense the way that we set that up. So that's helping a little bit. So one thing I just jumped ahead to do, I don't want to do this in general, but with the with the Typhlo building, you can also tell it to receive, to receive less GI, not generate. And that means it's not going to get affected as much, but that's going to be for everything, so I don't really want to mess with that too much. But yeah, main thing is just to do with toning these back a little bit. So I just brought that back to 0.5, and that's a 0.007, and you can see that now the fire is not as intense. By the way, I think I accidentally brought this down from 5, I'm not sure. So if that was the case, then it's up to you. It's not really going to affect things too much. But these values will, because this is going to make the multiplier of the fire a lot less. And then same thing with, you know, how it affects illumination. But I think that that's good overall. I think we're doing pretty good. Last thing I might do, actually go back into smoke opacity, and we can double that. Like, sorry, it's meant to be 0.8, and that would just make this more opaque. But I think that's it. Like, you know, like I said, I just want to go through the basics here because there's so much to cover. But what we can do now is we'll just split everything up into shaders. I won't get into building out the specific shaders just because it's outside the spectrum of what I want to cover. I didn't actually intend to cover rendering per se in this, but I want to just kind of focus on the effects specifically. But I will just talk about how to split everything up, because I do think that that is pretty important. So we've done this. The last thing I want to do is, let's just go through and split out the building and the secondaries, so that way they're individual elements. So we can hide the Phoenix, and we'll just start with the secondaries. So go export group A. And rather than going through all these, I think what will be easier is we just go back to our map. And we can see in here that we have export O and P. So that's a lot easier. I'm just going to turn display in viewport off for a second. And then we go O. And then I believe that was glass. I might need to rename these. I'm going to clone that, copy, and we'll call this railings. And this would be group P. Let's just make sure that that's not instanced. Okay, group P. So I can turn display on. And then same thing with the glass. I'm just going to display in viewport. But as you can see, we now have these split up because we saved out all of these different channels. We did all that. We planned ahead. So now everything's broken out into their specific groups, which makes life a lot easier because we have one cache, which is actually the glass, the railings. And now we can actually just separate them out into individual objects and then assign the shaders and do whatever else we want to do to them specifically to that group. So just these two, we have the metal shader here, and this is the projection and blah, blah, blah. With the railings, though, we just want the actual metal shader. So easiest thing to do is I'm just going to get our metal shader here. Oh, we already have it, I guess. Let's just call this metal only. And we just assign the metal shader to the railings, because if they break, like the new surfaces generated in the middle, you know, they're going to be metal. We don't really care. Glass is a little bit different. So with glass, we would go back to our glass shader here. And we still need to set it up, but we can assign the material. And that means that we would just have glass in, you know, both of these groups. So that way the front could be the projection if we want that, and then everything else is glass, or just make it all glass. So I'll leave that up to you. Like I said, we're not going to get into shaders in this lesson. It's going to be just about breaking it all up, but this is where you would set that up. Me personally, I would just rather set up a glass shader with a lot of reflection to it and use the environment map, the HDRI. So again, I'll leave that up to you. But for now, let's just assign the shader to it. Okay, so we've got the glass and the railings. Now we have our building, which will be the last bit that we need to do, and then we got it all set up. So what do we need to break this up into? Currently it has everything in there. I guess it also has the glass. So again, if we look at this, we have all of our individual groups. So O was one of them. So for now, I could turn display off in viewport, and we could just go through IJK, LMN. Let's just turn everything else off. We still want the ship, but that's about it. So I think those are all the ones we want to see. Turn display on in viewport. So we don't want O, because O is actually the glass. I guess we exported that twice. So we see here we have O, but then we did it again here. So we probably didn't need that one. But now we have all of this. So one thing that we could look into was the railings. If we specifically, not the railings, the window frames, if we wanted them to, you know, be different, we could definitely set that up as well. But for now, we can see that this is the floor, the ceilings, everything's in there. And another way that we can do this, by the way, is actually not to have any of these on. I'm just going to have A. And this is where we can get really powerful with what we're doing. because suddenly, if we go back to our very first group, we have A, B, C, D. So even though they end up going through all of these different groups and doing all this stuff, we have all that still saved out here. So with this, we could call this concrete. And looking back here, this would be A, C, and D. And that way, I would just turn these on. And then suddenly we have all of that set up that we can apply the concrete shader. And then if we want to single out specifically just the frames, the window frames, as being metal or whatever we wanted, that's where we can go in and specifically just show cache B. So even though they went through I, J, K, L, M, N, they're still remembering their roots because we didn't override it, we added to it each time. So now all of that's set up, we can do the precast shader, which originally I was going to call it concrete just because that's where we're heading with it, but I just figured I'd stick with what we had. But concrete shader. No, clone this, copy, and we'll just call this frames. And this would be the last thing that we need to set up. So again, I'm just going to turn display and viewport off for a second, just because it's a little bit quicker. We can also turn off display particles in viewport if they're distracting at all, but we just want to have B, display in viewport. And we can turn the particles off too here. Okay, so this is cool because now we can see that we have just the window frames there, and we can apply that whole metal shader to it. And then we have our glass. We also have the railings. We also have all of our fluids. And this makes up our whole effect. So at this point, we're in a good spot. Like from here, you need to go and build your shaders. So building a concrete shader, a glass shader, a metal shader, doing all of those things. Our atmospherics are all set up. I feel like these are pretty good overall. We could optimize the rendering speeds and get into all of that. And from there, it's a matter of just rendering all of this out. And then we go into comp. And like I said, this is outside of the 10 lessons we're currently doing. But these are the next steps. So as a bonus for everyone who's signed up for the live action series, there will be, obviously you keep all of these current lessons, but there will be an additional few on setting up all your render passes, as well as optimizing render times a little bit, and then going into comp. In other words, bringing it all in, the live action footage, the roto, everything, to do all that. So there's more lessons, because again, to cover everything that we're doing in here, it's so much more work. I feel like it's more like 15, 20 videos to do all that, but this is what we've managed to cover. Is always more to do with the effects itself. But from here, like, I'd love to get more into doing photorealistic lighting and shading as one of the key elements, as well as a lot of subtleties you can add in. There's also a lot we can do with matte painting, and a lot of us think that matte painting, especially as effects people, we think matte painting is more for painting backgrounds, stuff like that. When I first got into effects, I learned to do matte painting by Craig Mullins, actually, who I finally got to meet a few years ago, 20-something years later. I got into learning to matte paint very early on because I got into doing live action effects, like what we're doing here, back in the 90s. And during that time, like if I destroyed a building, then the building's still behind it, so I need to create what I called an aftermath plate, which was painting in all the destruction, things like that, to add a lot of extra detail. So a lot of this, like now with 3D projections, we can actually paint in a lot of detail into the destruction, so that way as the building hits, we can paint in lots of extra stuff. On top of that, we can also then put scorch marks and other things everywhere as well, cracks, you name it. So there's so many additional things in comp that we can do, and that's again what we explore in LAS, is going deep into each and every one of these things to learn it inside out and do that over an entire year. But I hope that this has been really beneficial. Again, like looking back at where we began, the way that we set everything up, we did this in an intelligent way where we started bringing everything in, we split it all up. Like I've seen other people where they just, bring in a bunch of objects as one system, they tell it to be a Voronoi object and break apart, blah, blah, blah. And like, so doing it this way probably looks crazy. Like, why are you, so neurotic to break all these up and then import them into a new system? Whereas by doing that, it saves so much time because it doesn't recalculate every time we make a change here. And then doing the secondaries here as a separate system. And then bringing everything in, but never overriding any of the groups we're adding to them, meant that later on, after we go through all of this stuff, we then do the post-processing, the export, we do everything, and then we can go all the way back to the original groups that we set, because we set them here and we added in the additional groups. So all the way at the very end, 2 weeks later, we can now call the original groups that we're from, and all of this is showing up. So you can see now we're looking at just the frames and having them all broken apart. All of the control, everything that we've done, so now that we can assign shaders to everything, we can balance everything out as much as we want. All of that set up for us. We have projections on here, so the plate is on here, whereas on the other side of the building, it would be the concrete texture. And then any areas that crack here, all of those are going to be material ID 3 inside of it. So then we have a broken concrete texture that's not painted on top of that. So all of these things add up for the final effect that we've built. So it's been a long journey and we've covered a lot. And this is your chance to take it through to the final steps, which is building out the shaders. We've set up the lighting. Everything's ready to render. We just need to build the render elements. And part of that is building multi-mats for all the material IDs and everything else. But you're at a good point now where it's more about just pushing it through to final. But I'm excited for the rest of us who are moving through the remaining couple of lessons to do with comp and everything else, because it's more an introduction to what we're going to be doing on a much bigger scale over a year in the live action series, using industry tools that are more standard, such as Houdini and Thinking Particles, but also on top of that, really focusing in on everything, because again, 2 weeks is all we've spent on this, and that's not very long at all to go through so much industry knowledge, which has acquired 2 decades to acquire. So that's why I think it's very extensive to go through and really do a deep dive on every little thing. Like, how do we add that, paint in that little extra detail? How do we simulate this? How do we create all the fire trails? How do we create sparks and embers and dust and rocks and glass and all the additional things, everything that we see in a Hollywood movie? So for everyone who's gone through this training, I hope this was something that gave you all the necessary tools that you need, and I hope that really kind of opened your eyes to a real production process and what we do in feature film. And for everyone who's still got the remaining videos to go in the live action series, as well as getting into all the hero lessons that we're going to be doing, I'm really excited for that, because again, this is what we've done in 2 weeks. I can't wait to see what we can do in 12 months. Okay, what did you think? I hope this lesson and I hope all of this entire course has been a chance for you to really level up your skills and see what you can accomplish. There's so much more I want to share with you, and I always think, where do I want to be a year from today? Exactly where I am right now, or on my way to getting my dream job. If you want to join the live action series, this is your chance to take action. Hit the button below this video and you can instantly sign up and join us over the next 12 months. This has been so fun to go through this training with you, and I try to give as much value as I can wherever I can, so I hope to do more of these down the line. These videos are going to be available until 11:59 p.m. Friday, Los Angeles time. So this is your chance to go through them as much as you can during the time that you still have. Thank you again for going through this training and trusting in me to serve you. It's been really inspiring to see all the amazing work coming out of these lessons that people have been emailing me. I'd love to see what you've done, so feel free to shoot me an email anytime. I'd love to see what you've come up with. And for the rest of us in the live action series, I am so excited for us to get started. The next 12 months are going to be absolutely insane. As we finish things up right now, I'm going to be recording a personal introduction for every single one of us in the course to welcome you personally to the live action series. I'm going to be discussing with everyone what review times they want to have, so that way it works for all of us, no matter where we are in the world. And I'm going to be organizing a live career intensive to kick things off, to talk about strategy, goals, a lot of what to do in the coming months for our career. But also want to do a demo reel review to be able to review your work, critique it, give feedback, so that way you have a laser focused demo reel to be able to get the work in your dream job that you want. But on top of that, I'm going to be doing an Avengers production course. We're going to be talking about Avengers Endgame, how I landed the job, negotiated everything, including being flown first class to Hollywood to work on the movie, hotel in Beverly Hills, the whole deal. So this is going to be fun because there's a different perspective to the usual stuff. This is actually talking about an actual case study of the nitty-gritty part of getting a job and how I handled it, the whole process. And of course, the biggest thing that I'm excited about is teaching all of us to be able to work from home, how to get clients, how to set ourselves up, what hardware, what software we need, how to build a pipeline, how to understand the types of jobs that we can take on, how to negotiate money, all aspects of that. So that I think is going to be the critical part to get all of us up and running over the next couple of weeks. And of course, we have more videos in this training, so we're going to be going through a lot more in the Shores training, as well as, of course, the 500 plus hours of core training in the live action series, all the other bonuses, and some other surprises I haven't mentioned yet that you will get access to, which also includes Venom training, Thanos training, and a couple other goodies. Again, I want this to be a surprise. So I am so excited. There is so much more to come, and this has been a long journey. So thank you again for going through this training. Like I said, if you're on the fence, trust your gut, and if you will be part of the live action series with us, then amazing, awesome. I'm so excited to serve you over the coming year. And if not, no problem. I'll still put out free training where I can, and I do the best I can to help the community where I can as well. Okay, thanks for watching. Make the most of this training while it's available.